My body hit the steps before I had time to catch my breath. 1 second I was standing. The next I was weightless, tumbling through space, arms flailing hip, cracking against the edge of the second stair. The world didn't spin. It just tilted hard, then stopped. I don't know if he pushed me. I don't know if he meant to. But I know what I felt. And I know what I heard. Footsteps. Then silence. And somewhere in that silence, lying flat on the floor, I started remembering. Not how I got hurt, but how I got here. The house I left behind wasn't perfect. The wallpaper in the kitchen peeled near the stove. The railing on the back porch had been loose for years. But it held my life like a basket holds fruit. Full familiar, a little worn, but mine. It was Jared who first brought up the idea of moving. He came by after work one Thursday, took off his shoes like he still lived there, and sat across from me at the dining room table. He asked how I was managing. I told him the truth, that the stairs were getting harder, that the grocery trips took longer than they used to. He nodded but didn't say much. A week later he came back with a plan. Said he and Lana had space. Said the guest room already had a new mattress. Said I wouldn't have to worry about bills or snow shoveling or strange noises at night. Just pack what I needed. Just for a little while. I said yes before I thought too long. It wasn't the first time I'd said yes to make someone else feel better. I packed in quiet. 3 boxes. My books, my clothes, a few framed photos. I left the rest where it was. I told myself it would only be temporary, that my house would be waiting when I was ready to come back. Jared drove me over on a rainy afternoon. Lana greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The house smelled like lemon soap and air freshener, clean in a way that warned you not to touch anything. They had made space. They had cleared a drawer in the bathroom and a shelf in the hall closet. Jared carried my boxes upstairs, then left me alone to unpack. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to a house that didn't creak in the right places. It was quiet. Too quiet. Let me ask you something. Have you ever left behind a place that held your whole life, only to realize you packed up more than your belongings? That maybe, without meaning to you, left behind your voice too? The morning light came in softer at Jared's place. No sharp slants through the bay window, just a filtered glow through thick curtains that never opened all the way. Everything was in neutral tones, beige walls, grey rugs, clean lines. It looked like a picture from a catalogue, not a home with a heartbeat. Lana had a routine. She left the house early, always in pressed slacks and heels, barely nodding as she passed the kitchen. We didn't speak much. She wasn't rude, just absent. Jared worked from home most days, though he spent more time in his office with the door closed than anywhere else. He brought me coffee in the mornings, set it down, gently smiled like a man checking something off a list. I didn't complain. I stayed quiet. Folded towels, read books twice over. Still, I couldn't help noticing small things. My favorite mug disappeared after the first week. The blanket I brought from home was swapped out for a lighter one without asking. The shelf I was using near the front closet now held Lana's shoes. One afternoon, Jared came into the kitchen while I was making tea. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me closely. Then he brought it up. The house. Mine. He said it had been sitting empty too long. That break-ins were getting more common in the neighborhood. That insurance didn't cover neglect. He said I should think about letting him manage it. Just for a while. Rent it out. Keep the place from falling apart. I hesitated. I still had the keys in my purse. I still thought of it as home. But Jared's tone was calm, reasonable. He said I wouldn't have to lift a finger. He would take care of everything. I could keep the income. He would just handle the setup. A few days later, he handed me a folder. several pages of typed forms. He flipped through them, quickly pointed where to sign. I asked about a few things, but he brushed them aside, said it was standard language. I signed where he pointed. My hand shook a little, but I didn't let it show. After that, he seemed lighter, happier even, said it was the right decision, that he was proud of me for being practical. I smiled back, but something inside me settled in the wrong place. That night I stood at the window and tried to remember the sound of my old house, the hum of the refrigerator, the way the floor creaked near the hallway, the quiet moments I had once called mine. But the silence here was different. It didn't hold memory. It held something else, something I hadn't named yet, something that had already begun to take up space. It started with a letter that never came. I waited for the usual property tax notice. January had come and gone, then February. Nothing arrived. At first I told myself it was a clerical delay. Maybe the mail was slow. But a part of me knew better. I didn't say anything to Jared. I watched him carefully. He seemed relaxed more than usual, smiled more, talked about his new project at work, joked about how Lana wanted to redecorate the living room again. He never mentioned the house. One morning, while Jared was out running errands, I took a bus across town. I didn't go to the old branch of the library where people might recognize me. I went to the new one near the Civic Center. I asked for access to the public land records terminal and sat down at the screen. The system wasn't hard to use. I had helped people navigate it for years back when I worked reference. I typed in the address. My address. The page loaded. Parcel ID. Lot size. Built in 1980. And then it hit me. The owner was listed as Lillian Fox. I sat perfectly still. Not a company. Not Jared. Not me. A stranger. A transfer recorded 6 weeks ago. Paid in full. Deed recorded. Complete. The screen stayed bright, but everything else faded. The hum of computers, the shuffle of papers around me, the click of someone's pen tapping against a desk. I didn't hear any of it. I printed the page, folded it into my bag, walked outside into the cold. The wind pushed against my coat, and I let it. I sat on a cement bench near the bus stop. The document felt heavier than it should have. I stared straight ahead, not moving until the next bus arrived. I didn't get on. That evening I cooked dinner for myself in silence. Jared came home late, kissed the top of my head like always, asked what I was reading. I held up a magazine without looking at him. He never mentioned the house. I didn't either. Instead, I watched. Not just him, but Lana, too. The way she smiled just a second too long when she passed me in the hallway. The way her voice lowered when she took calls in the other room. The way the key hook by the front door suddenly held a new key fob I'd never seen before. I made no accusations. I asked no questions. But every night I read and reread the printout from the library. I traced my name in my mind, the one that should have been on that deed, the one that wasn't. I wasn't angry, not yet. But something inside me had shifted, a weight I didn't recognize, a silence that no longer felt like protection. It felt like erasure, and I wasn't ready to disappear. I waited 3 days after the discovery, not because I was uncertain. I needed the quiet to settle. I needed to see Jared the way he truly was, as not the way I used to picture him. It was Saturday morning when I asked him to meet me out back. The garden behind their house was small, with a few raised beds and a metal bench tucked under a fading maple. I stood near the rosemary bush, holding the printed property record in a manila folder. Jared stepped outside wearing a sweatshirt and sneakers, sipping from a to-go cup like he had somewhere better to be. He glanced at the folder, then at me. I handed it over without a word. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning fast, mouth tight. Then he looked up. His expression didn't change. Not surprise, not guilt. Just that same calm face he used when telling bad news like it was nothing. He said I had misunderstood, that things were complicated, that sometimes ownership needed to shift for legal reasons. He said the house was still ours, that nothing had really changed. I didn't speak. I waited. He exhaled, irritated now. Said he and Lana had been covering a lot. Bills, maintenance, everything. Said I had no idea how hard it had been. That I had lived in a fantasy while they dealt with reality. That he hadn't meant to exclude me, but that I was making things harder than they needed to be. He didn't raise his voice. He lowered it, calm and practiced, the way people do when they want their words to sound like reason, not control. Then he said I had always been difficult, that even when Dad died, I clung to the house like it was a shrine, that I had turned into a burden, that Lana had tried, really tried to welcome me. The words didn't sting the way he hoped. They didn't need to. They landed heavy, settled deep. I looked him in the eyes for a long time. Jared blinked first. He asked if I was planning to take this somewhere. His voice had cooled, and there was a flicker of something sharper beneath it, something I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I had and I'd ignored it. I said I hadn't decided yet. He tossed the folder back onto the bench, said he had a meeting in an hour, and walked away. No apology, no hesitation. Lana didn't come outside. I saw her through the kitchen window washing a glass eyes on the sink. She never looked up, but she'd heard everything. I knew that much. Some silences are loud. Hers was one of them. I stood alone in the garden, staring down at the folder. It was slightly bent now, the corner torn from where he'd gripped it. But the truth inside hadn't changed. They both knew what they had done, and now so did I. After that morning in the garden, things shifted, not in a dramatic way. No slammed doors or yelling matches, just small, quiet changes, the kind that creep in like a slow fog and make it hard to remember what things looked like before. I noticed it first in the kitchen. The mug I always used for tea, the one with the faded blue rim, disappeared. When I asked Lana if she had seen it, she said no. But a new white mug appeared on the shelf the next day. Plain, soulless, no memory attached. Next, the photo I kept on the hallway table was gone. It was a picture of Jared as a toddler standing in the yard of our old house in his rain boots. I found it later face down in the bottom drawer of the linen cabinet. No frame, just the photo, slightly bent. My books were moved, stacked in a box and placed in the guest room closet. The shelf they had sat on now held decorative bowls and a diffuser with sticks poking out of it. Nothing was said. Nothing ever is. That was the part that made it feel deliberate. The guest room felt smaller now. Lana had replaced the quilt with a thinner one in a colour that didn't suit me. A fresh lavender candle sat on the nightstand, still in its wrapper. It smelled nothing like home. The one I brought had vanished. I opened the closet one afternoon and found my coat pushed behind a row of clothes that weren't mine. My walking shoes were gone. In their place were boxes labelled for storage. I kept telling myself it wasn't personal, that maybe they just needed space. But the pattern was too clear. It wasn't about things, it was about presence. Mine was being erased one item at a time. In the mirror, I studied my own reflection. My face had softened in places. The skin along my jaw wasn't as firm. The lines around my mouth had deepened. I looked like someone who had been slowly fading without realizing it. And now the house reflected that too. The role I had always played was dissolving. Not just mother, but anchor, historian, keeper of memory. That version of me had been quietly packed away. Jared avoided long conversations. Lana stayed busy. Their lives moved forward around me as if I were part of the furniture, useful, silent, unobtrusive. I stopped mentioning the house. I stopped asking about mail. I stopped waiting for explanations. Instead, I paid attention. The distance between us wasn't a crack anymore. It was a chasm, and I had stopped trying to build a bridge. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come with funerals. The kind that arrives when you're still living but no longer seen. That was where I stood. Not angry, not broken, just fading, piece by quiet piece. I hadn't meant to go through the filing cabinet. I only wanted to find a card. One of the old birthday cards Jared had made me when he was 7, drawn in crayon and folded uneven. But the drawer didn't hold memories anymore. It held something else. Tucked in the back was a thin folder, unmarked, stuffed between old appliance manuals. Inside were copies of documents, deed transfers, a blank check with my name printed on the top, a signature that didn't look quite like mine. I sat down on the carpet folder open across my lap, the weight of it sinking into my chest. I started flipping through the pages. One form had a date I didn't recognize. Another had a contact number with an area code from out of state. It felt like looking at a version of my life that had been rearranged without me. The door behind me opened suddenly. Jared stood there, silent eyes on the papers in my lap. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then his voice came low and flat. He said I was not supposed to be going through things, that I didn't understand what I was looking at, that it was all legal, that I needed to calm down. I tried to rise, folder in hand. He stepped forward. I don't know if it was the way he reached or the suddenness of it, but I backed up. My foot slipped on the edge of the throw rug. My heel caught the stair molding behind me. The shift was small, but enough. My body tilted. The folder flew sideways. My arms swung out, searching for something that wasn't there. Then everything went white. When I came to, I was flat on my back at the bottom of the stairs. My right side screamed with pain, and my shoulder felt wrong, dislocated, or worse. The light above the stairs flickered. I could hear the refrigerator humming behind the kitchen door. Jared was gone. No footsteps, no voice. Just the low whir of the house continuing without me. I must have passed out again because the next time I opened my eyes, there were strangers in uniform. A paramedic shining a light in my eyes. Someone asked my name. I could barely form the word. They said Jared had called them, said he told them I fell. They asked if I had a history of dizziness. I couldn't answer. At the hospital, I was placed in a hallway bay, curtain half drawn. They ran scans. Confirmed a broken collarbone and deep bruising across my ribs. A nurse brought pain meds and water in a paper cup. Later that night, the nurse returned. Her name was Janelle. She had quiet eyes. Said I'd be staying overnight. Said someone named Jared had filled out the admission form but left before the doctor finished. I asked if he had said anything else. She paused, then shook her head. And that was how it felt. Not like I had fallen. Like I had been left. The room they moved me to was small, tucked in the back corner of the ward, with a window that faced the parking lot. The walls were a pale green that seemed to drain the colour from everything. My right shoulder was strapped into a sling. Every movement was a reminder of how far I had fallen, how much I couldn't undo. The painkillers dulled the edge, but not the memory. I kept seeing Jared's face when he opened that door. Blank, cold, like I was a task to manage, not a person to protect. It was Janelle who noticed first. She came in to check my vitals and lingered longer than necessary. Her eyes scanned the bruises that bloomed across my ribs. She asked soft questions without asking anything outright. Then she made a note in my chart and stepped out. The next day, a woman came in during the early afternoon. She was dressed in plain navy slacks and a cardigan, a lanyard around her neck. She introduced herself as Patrice, said she worked with elder care services and reviewed cases when there were concerns about safety or exploitation. She didn't push. She didn't pry. She just pulled up the chair beside my bed and waited. I told her I was fine, that it had been a fall, that Jared had called the ambulance and filled out the paperwork. She nodded, but didn't write anything down. Then she asked if anyone else had access to my finances, if I had signed anything recently, if I was still receiving mail from my home. The words caught in my throat. Not because I didn't know the answers, but because I did. I said I used to own a house, that I wasn't sure if I still did. Patrice listened quietly, patiently. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She didn't tell me to be careful. She just asked if I'd be willing to talk to someone about what might come next. Later that evening, after dinner, trays had come and gone. I watched the hallway through the open slit in the curtain. Across the way, a man no older than I was sat upright in bed, surrounded by his daughters. They brought him a blanket from home. They laughed. One fed him soup slowly and with care. I turned my head back to the ceiling. I had Jared once. That little boy who used to tug on my arm in the supermarket, who cried when I forgot his lunchbox. That boy was gone, replaced by a man I no longer recognized. But I wasn't alone in the way I used to think. Aloneness had changed shape. Now it came with names like Patrice, and questions that didn't need answers right away, and a stillness that didn't feel empty, just unfinished. 2 mornings after Patrice's visit, I asked Janelle if I could borrow a phone, not to call Jared. I had nothing left to ask him. My hand shook slightly as I dialed the number one I hadn't used in years but never forgot. Carla picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice still had that clipped confidence I remembered. We hadn't spoken since she retired from her law practice and moved out to her sister's property. I told her I was in the hospital. I told her something had happened with Jared. I told her I needed help. She didn't ask for details. She just said she'd be there by noon. When she arrived, she came through the door with a small legal pad and a pen already in hand. Her grey hair was pulled back into a low knot. Her coat looked like it had been grabbed in a hurry. She didn't hug me. That wasn't her way. She sat beside the bed and waited for me to speak. I explained everything as best I could. The house, the documents, the drawer, the fall. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she flipped to a clean page and started listing what she would need from me. First, the address of the property, then the approximate dates of any paperwork I had signed. She asked about notary stamps, account numbers, if I had ever seen Jared mail anything on my behalf. Each question felt like a light flicking on in a hallway I hadn't walked down in years. I remembered signing a document about management, not ownership. I remembered Jared rushing me. I remembered not getting a copy. I remembered his voice when he said it was nothing to worry about. Carla frowned when I told her that part. She said forged signatures were more common than people thought. That elder financial fraud was easier to commit when no one believed it was happening. She said there were laws, that we weren't powerless. She also said the first thing we'd do was look at the signature. She opened her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside was a scanned copy of the property transfer Jared had filed. She had found it online through the county's public records portal. She placed it on the tray table and handed me a pen. She asked me to write my name the way I had on my license. I did. Then she held up the transfer form. The signature was close, but not mine. The angle of the E, the tail of the D, the way the S dipped at the end. Someone had copied it. Not well. Carla tapped the edge of the form with her pen. Her eyes didn't move from mine. This, she said, was where we start. That night, lying in a room dimmed by hospital light, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly, but alignment. Like the world had shifted a degree back toward center. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel erased. I felt like someone coming back into focus. By the following Tuesday, Carla had already made 3 phone calls, filed 2 formal record requests, and pulled my credit history from the last 2 years. She arrived at the hospital just after visiting hours started, holding a folder that looked heavier than it should have. She didn't sit this time. She stood at the foot of my bed and told me the truth without softening the words. Jared had used my name to secure a business loan 6 months ago, a line of credit with a private lender in Nevada, backed by the title of the house he had quietly transferred to someone named Lillian Fox. The money from the sale hadn't gone to any shared account. It had gone directly to a bank account under Lana's name. Not joint, not trust-based, just hers. The loan had failed. The business hadn't launched. What remained was a trail of paperwork quietly filed and perfectly stacked, all pointing back to me as the original owner of the asset. If Carla hadn't known where to look, no one would have noticed until too late. The fraud was layered but not flawless. She showed me the deposit slips. Transfers made in amounts just under the reporting threshold. Transactions disguised as reimbursements. It wasn't messy. It was calculated. I didn't ask how Jared had learned to do this. I didn't need to know. Carla had already spoken to Patrice. The 2 of them worked well together, calm but methodical. Patrice had submitted a report to the County Elder Services Division. Carla was preparing a complaint to the State Financial Crimes Unit. But it would take time. I asked what would happen to the house. Carla said we had a chance. That since the deed had been fraudulently executed and the signature disputed, we could petition to void the transfer. If the notary used was proven illegitimate, the sale could be rolled back. But it depended on timing, and on what the buyer knew. There were still gaps, still questions about the lenders and whether Jared had other debts I didn't know about. But for the first time since the fall, I felt like I wasn't drifting. I felt anchored. Later that afternoon, while Carla met with hospital staff about getting my discharge arranged, I sat by the window and looked out over the parking lot. Snow had started to fall again, light and drifting sideways in the wind. I thought about Jared's voice when he used to call me Mom, how it had changed, how long it had been since I'd heard him say it without that edge of impatience. And I thought about Lana, about the way she had moved through that house like I was a misplaced object, a reminder of something she wished Jared would leave behind. But I was done being misplaced. I was done being silent. With Carla and Patrice, I had the right people beside me. People who saw me not as a burden, not as a mistake, but as someone worth fighting for. And that for now was enough to begin. I left the hospital 2 days earlier than expected. Carla arranged for a driver to take me to a temporary apartment near the city centre. Small, but clean. It had a kitchenette, a firm bed, and a window that caught the afternoon light. Patrice checked in once a day by phone. The rest of the time, I sat with the paperwork, rereading everything Carla had uncovered. On the 3rd day, I asked Carla for one favor. I wanted to speak to Lana. Alone. Jared was out of town, supposedly meeting with someone about refinancing a project that no longer existed. It was the only window I'd have. Lana didn't know I was coming. I showed up at the door with my right arm still in a sling. She opened it just enough to see me, then stepped aside without a word. The house smelled like citrus cleaner. The same smell it always had. Sterile. Unwelcoming. She offered tea, then poured herself a cup and left me to sit at the dining table. Her eyes flicked to my shoulder, then away. I told her I knew about the house. I knew about the loan. I knew where the money went. She didn't flinch, just lifted her cup to her lips and drank. She said Jared had tried to fix things, that I made it harder by asking questions. that maybe I didn't realize how much pressure we had put on him. Her words were smooth rehearsed. I let her talk. Then she said it. She said the account had to be in her name because mine would raise red flags, that the lender already had too many questions, that Jared said it would be easier if the sale looked clean, like it had passed through a legitimate buyer. She looked at me then as if daring me to react. I didn't. In my coat pocket, my phone recorded everything. Carla had taught me how to set it up. One button, audio only, clear and legal in this state if one party consents. I let Lana finish her tea. Then I stood. She didn't ask where I was going. I said thank you before leaving, not because she deserved it, but because I needed the moment to close without drama. Outside, the air was sharp, the sky overcast. I walked 2 blocks before calling Carla from a bench near the library. I told her we had what we needed. That night, I emailed the recording to Patrice. No threats, no accusations. Just Lana's voice, clear and steady, saying what no one else could prove until now. The pieces were falling into place. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because I listened, because I waited, and because I refused to be erased. The meeting was held in a small office downtown, the kind with beige carpet and uncomfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Carla was already there, seated at the head of the table. Across from her sat Jared and Lana. A representative from the title company, an attorney from the county, and one quiet assistant from the district's elder fraud task force completed the circle. I was not present. That had been the decision from the start. I didn't need to sit across from Jared again. I didn't need to see Lana's blank face or hear excuses polished to sound like logic. Carla would represent me. That was enough. At the center of the table was a folder. Inside it, a copy of the signed affidavit. The evidence from Patrice, the voice recording, and a notarized letter from me revoking all prior legal and financial permissions granted to Jared. Carla read a prepared statement. She spoke clearly. No anger, no blame, just the facts. Jared had violated the trust of someone vulnerable. Lana had participated knowingly. The money had been redirected to private accounts. The house had been sold under a forged signature. The sale itself was under review, and the lender had already agreed to pause collections pending further investigation. Then came the new document, a revised will, one I had signed a week earlier. Carla opened the envelope, placed it on the table, and read the key paragraph aloud. All inheritance previously designated to Jared Michael Dobbins was rescinded. My remaining assets, including restitution funds from the ongoing case, would be transferred into a trust named after my late husband. The trust would serve one purpose: to provide legal and emotional support to elderly women who had experienced financial abuse at the hands of their children. There was no drama, no yelling, just the soft hum of air conditioning and the quiet turning of a page. Jared said nothing. Lana crossed her arms. No one stood up. After the meeting, Carla stepped outside and sent me a single text. It's done. I sat at the window of my temporary apartment, looking down at the sidewalk below. A boy passed by holding his grandmother's hand. They laughed at something I couldn't hear. I didn't cry. The grief I carried had already turned to something else, something heavier and more stable. Not forgiveness, not yet, but freedom, not the kind you fight for, the kind you walk into when the door finally opens. And I had chosen to walk through it. Without turning back, I moved into the new place just as the first leaves began to fall. It was a small apartment above a senior resource center, part of a non-profit housing program Patrice had helped connect me with. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, a little balcony, and enough sunlight to keep my plants from wilting. I furnished it slowly. A second-hand chair from the thrift store, a bookshelf I built with my own hands, I brought the photo of Jared in rain boots, taped it back into its frame, and placed it on the windowsill. It stayed there not as a reminder of him, but of the woman who once carried the weight of that boy on her hip through every storm and scraped knee. There was no mail waiting for me, no calls from Jared, no apologies. But the silence now felt different. It wasn't emptiness, it was space, room to stretch, to breathe. Most mornings I made coffee and sat on the balcony with a blanket over my lap. People passed below on their way to the centre. Some waved, some didn't. I liked both kinds. One morning, as I was watering the small rosemary pot near the railing, I saw a familiar figure walking toward the park entrance. It was Janelle. She didn't notice me at first, but when she looked up, her smile was warm and wide. We didn't speak, just nodded. It was enough. Later that day, I walked through the park. The trees had turned. Rust-coloured leaves crunched beneath my shoes. I passed families, couples, a woman walking a dog in a pink sweater. No one knew me, and I found comfort in that. By the fountain, I stopped and sat on a bench. I had lived through betrayal loss and the slow erasure of identity, but I had also lived through the return. Piece by piece, I had reclaimed my voice, not with noise, with clarity, with quiet that carried weight. I didn't need to be seen to matter. I had seen myself, and that after everything was the beginning of a life I could finally call my own. If you've ever felt invisible in your own story, like your voice was no longer yours to use, I hope Elaine's journey reminded you that silence does not mean surrender. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is simply begin again. If this story stayed with you or mirrored something inside your own life, take a moment, breathe, then share. Your story may be the lifeline someone else is still searching for.